And tonight we're going to tackle a controversial issue head-on. Well, it's controversial in the media anyway, the subject of trapping. Each spring we do a feature where we follow a trapper on his trap line, but this year I wanted to tackle the celebrity fur business head-on. You know, the movie stars campaigning for fake furs because they feel the trapping is inhumane and cruel and the wildlife is endangered. Well, Catherine Mulhaupt, the editor of our Outdoor Digest magazine, she wears furs and she talks eloquently on this subject, so stay tuned. It's Thursday night, time for Michigan Outdoors.
Well, I think it's a lot of noise from people who really don't understand what they're talking about. It's fashionable to be against furs, but people really don't know what they're talking about. People say that, I heard one celebrity quoted saying that from an ecological standpoint, he would prefer a petroleum-based fur as opposed to a real fur. Well, that's about as backwards as you can get, because fur, real fur, is produced naturally.
Catherine Mulhaupt grew up in a non-hunting family, but she studied conservation and the environment, and she's quite outspoken about furs and trapping. I asked her if artificial furs are actually more harmful to the environment.
I would say yes. It's the same question as you get in the supermarkets nowadays. Do you want a paper bag or a plastic bag? And many people think, oh, I'll save a tree, I'll take the plastic bag. But that's the wrong choice, because first of all, petroleum reserves are not renewable. They are limited. They are a good source of pollution, either through oil spills or the pollution that's sent into the air through the distilling process and the very other aspects of production. They're not biodegradable. You throw them in the landfill, they're going to be there forever. Whereas a paper bag comes from a tree, they're very renewable, will grow more. They're natural and they're very biodegradable. The same thing applies to furs. Fake furs have all the same disadvantages of other petroleum-based products, whereas a natural fur, first of all, it's going to last a lot longer because it through the natural process and then through the tanning process, it is preserved for a much longer period of time. You're not going to have a fake fur lasting 50 or 60 years and being handed down from mother to daughter.
But you said that the petroleum-based furs won't degrade.
They won't degrade in a situation in which you'd like them to degrade. They might fall apart in the wearing of them, but those pieces that have fallen apart are not going to degrade themselves, whereas a fur, if you don't care for it and put it in a situation where it's exposed to the various elements or bugs or things like that, yes, it will be gone, so you have to take a lot more care with it.
Most people don't realize that fur bearers like raccoons and skunks are the biggest predators of baby ducks and other game birds. They kill hundreds of thousands each spring. I asked Catherine if getting rid of the harmful predators is another plus for real furs.
That may be, but again, that's part of the natural process. I don't feel that any one animal deserves to live or die over another animal if it's part of the natural process. If they're not an introduced species that is ravaging otherwise stable populations, I don't think that we should look at taking a fur as a punishment to varmint animals. I don't feel that at all, but I think because those animals are there and it's planned for by nature that a natural or a stable population in the wild will always produce a surplus. And for example, in the case of rabbits, 80% of each year's new population is supposed to die. If they don't die, then you can run into a problem with overpopulation. And that, I know, particularly adheres to situations such as muskrats, where when muskrats have few natural predators, and nowadays the way our habitat is developed, they have few natural predators, you can have some real problems both in their own population, devastating their habitat and causing damage to farms and fields and roads. So trapping, although the way it's regulated, trapping is not going to remove massive segments of the population. Trapping is not an easy thing to do. It's still helps maintain some of the controls that nature meant to be there that humans have disrupted.
What about, well, the beavers are particularly damaged. Millions of dollars worth of road work has to be done every year just to fix what beavers have done. Have any comment on that?
I think it's a real problem in some areas, and trapping is one very natural way to help maintain the controls, as I said, that nature means to be there. There are very few natural predators for beaver nowadays because we've removed the large predators who used to prey on beaver. It takes a very large animal to be able to take a beaver. They're not easy. They're large animals themselves. They're feisty. They're hard to get to. So you tend to need the larger predators, the wolves, the coyotes to some extent, working to get a beaver, which you're not going to get nowadays. We've removed most of those predators from areas where the beaver still exists. They're quite compatible around human fields and farms and things like that where they can cause damage. I think a lot of people go under the very mistaken impression that in the wild, animals live a very idyllic life, that they don't die, they don't feel pain, they go on picnics together. Even some very educated people really don't understand the true short nature of most animals' lifespans in the wild. And they often believe animals live 20 or 30 years and die peacefully in their sleep, which is very much the exception. That's extremely unusual. Most animals have very short, very violent, very difficult lives. And I guess, speaking as someone who has been out on a trap line, who has seen animals taken in a variety of ways, I would say that the methods used to take animals for their fur are extremely humane compared to the way an animal would normally die, which would be through mange or rabies, starvation, injury, not to mention being eaten by other animals. Anyone who's aware of the way that animals normally die would say that the quick and humane methods used by trappers and hunters are preferable if an animal really had any sort of preference.
James Alford of Elkhart, Indiana, caught this 1 pound, 14-ounce bull bluegill in Iron County. At 19 pounds, 10 ounces, Twin Lake resident Rodney Gonzalez had his hands full of Muskegon Lake flathead catfish. Here's Greg Surtsey of Montrose with a Tittabawassee almost 11 3/4 pound walleye. He took it on a jig and minnow. And look at this nice 20-pound gobbler. Jack Whitsett of Owasso called it in Wexford County. Gary Wynn of Sterling Heights got this dandy buck, a 10-pointer, hunting in St. Clair County. And here's Jeff Stockman of Westland with a 22-pound, 3-ounce lake trout from Lake Superior, way out in Lake Superior. But just how far out?
Shelter Bay. Shelter, about 50 miles out. We're in
Hold on, you said 50 miles out?
Yeah, we went out that night and slept the night and then started fishing about 7 in the morning.
Drove the boat all night?
Yeah, about 50 miles out in the lake.
Did you ever hear the song about the Edmund Fitzgerald?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. We're about crazy. Yeah.
I guess you're about crazy. So you drove all night. How big was that boat?
30-foot. Big boat, man. It was happening. We caught 9 fish in like an hour and a half. And that was the last one. It was a monster.
A monster indeed from icy cold Superior that turned out to be big enough to make Jeff Stockman of Westland our Michigan Outdoors Trophy Angler of the Week. It's becoming popular to believe that we can stop the increasing violence in our society by passing new gun control laws. This attitude is frustrating to hunters and gun owners because if we oppose it, we're accused of being insensitive or even in favor of murder and violence. We're accused of hampering law enforcement. Actually, we share the same feelings, fears, and frustrations as non-gun owners. I have a 5-year-old son, and I am absolutely terrified about the choices he'll have to make when it comes to drugs. I'm also incensed at a society that refuses to show some guts and make some hard decisions, like building more prisons and locking up the dealers and users and throwing away the key. I have friends who are cops, guys who have worked undercover and smashed down the doors of dope dens and raids. And the thing they fear far more than a semi-automatic firearm is the early parolee. An early parolee killed one of their brother officers. Now, we're not really that different, cop or citizen, pro or anti-gun. The violence and the drugs frighten us all. But further gun control won't stop the violence, just as prohibition didn't stop drinking and laws haven't prevented drugs from being sold openly on the streets. That's my view of it, and believe me, you're looking at one worried father who really does wish the problem was that easy to solve.
Are porcupines ever without the protection of their quills? For a few hours after birth, baby porcupines are defenseless, but that's the only time. The quills quickly harden, and soon the baby porcupine, known as a porcupet, is able to raise its prickly hairs as well as an adult. The season doesn't open until the end of April, but I think a lot of anglers are in the mood for stream trout fishing. Let's take a look at some fishing we did last summer. Now, Terry Place is the manager of our museum and store at Houghton Lake, and one of his passions is trout fishing. Now, he enjoys fly fishing, but when the trout aren't taking flies, he doesn't hesitate to switch to a crawler. Not long ago, he and I drove to one of his favorite little local trout streams to try our luck. How do you hook a crawler for these trout?
There's lots of different ways. With a nice big worm, sometimes I Texas rig it, kind of thread it
Right
down
through
through his head a little bit and thread him on a little ways. And
Like that?
Sure.
So the hook doesn't come through the bottom. Everybody has their own favorite way of hooking a night crawler, and mine, like Terry's, is hooking it once through the end. I think that's the most enticing to a trout.
But
Let's give this a
works,
try.
let's give it a try.
Yeah.
Biggest thing is getting a worm in the water in front of the fish.
Okay, now you say that down here in this hole, there's
Always fish. Well, I've taken some of my best fish for the whole trip, right here in this first spot. Now that's a usual, that's not a guarantee.
Should I step in the river, you think, or in the creek?
Yeah, I'd try it from where you're at.
See if I can get it down there. Boy, I hate to get snagged up on the first cast. Really embarrassing. Oh, I like it. I like it. Water level seems... A lot of anticipation in this first cast, but it didn't raise a trout. So how long do you fish a hole like this? How many excellent casts do you plop up into that deep water before you move on? Well, for most of us trout fishermen, you fish a hole until Mother Nature calls you further upstream. Now, she calls by saying, "Hey, Fred, you want to get your worm back? You want to save your hook? It's on this tree. Come here and get it." The deep hole that held your trout is now ruined, at least for a while. But if you've been careful, you saved your hook and your worm, and you can press on. Isn't this water beautiful? Crystal clear. And it's these fallen trees and obstructions that the brook trout hide behind. The undercut banks hold the brown trout, which you coax out by rolling your worm right under their noses. What's the technique that you prefer in worm fishing for trout? You work upstream, I know.
Yes, prefer to work upstream. Whenever I can, I try to not use a split shot. Lets the worm kind of dance and dangle in the current, and lets it look natural, as though a stream or a shower is washed the worm in, just kind of dangles down through the current. Natural presentation. I think that usually works the best. Sometimes in a deep hole, it's a split shot, gets it down to the bottom. That's where they like to sit.
Now, one disadvantage of working upstream in casting is that you can't feed a worm down under some of the little roots and tangles if you were coming at the stream the other direction.
That's true, but you can always turn around. I think if you fish downstream, there's a strong tendency to kick up silt and debris in that, and I think that alarms the fish.
You think it would be a good tactic if after working upstream, we fished back downstream the same places? Or do you think those
that might work. It would give you access to different spots that you couldn't fish on the way up. Sure, I think that would work.
Well, what about the spook factor on trout? What have you found? Are they spooked for 15 minutes or an hour or a day?
Well, a lot of times, with a fly rod, a lot of times they'll refuse one fly, and it seems if you go to another fly, sometimes a little larger, a little smaller, they'll take it. With worm fishing and just working through the stream, and I think 15 minutes to half an hour, usually they'll go back on their feed.
Well, we should try that sometime, working back down the territory we just covered. This brook trout was just undersized, so back it goes into a habitat that, well, it's the most beautiful in all outdoors. Is this your favorite kind of fishing?
Yes, it is. I really enjoy this kind of country. It's usually you don't run into any other fishermen. I enjoy that. And usually you catch fish. Sometimes they're not big, but usually you catch fish, get some action.
You tie your own flies, take a lot of pride. I mean, look at all the gear. You have all the doodads that a trout fisherman would want, yet you're out here using worms.
Well, we tried the fly rod. That didn't seem to produce, and I enjoy catching fish. There's times I find when the flies are the most productive, and using the fly rod's a little bit more of a challenge sometimes. You catch a lot of tree trout, but I just enjoy catching fish, and I'm not afraid of using worms or going the purest way, using dry flies.
You haven't fished this stream much in the morning. I know you're mainly an evening trout fisherman.
That's just been because of my time schedule. It's getting up in the morning and making a mad dash and fishing for just an hour or two and then having to be responsible and tend to the old 9 to 5 is it's kind of rough. So usually after everything's done and I can relax and take a little time away, that's usually when I head to the streams.
Water level on this trout stream seems to be right up there.
Well, from what I understand, it's fed by artesian. So that's probably why it's still up and probably why it's so cold.
Not a bad one, huh? Ooh, saved my worm, too. We didn't really slay the trout.
That happens some days. Yeah. Some days you do. I think the stream has been getting a lot of pressure in recent times, and I think that might have a lot to do with it. Times when I've fished it, I release a lot of fish, but I like taking a few for the dinner, too. And I think a lot of people have been fishing it and primarily taking them for the dinner.
I finally caught one for dinner, but most of our trout were those worm-stealing little squirts. There we go. Oh, wow. That's what it is. That's what we've been getting there. That's what they've been stealing our worms. Look at that. The fight in a little brook trout is incredible. Now, they weren't running big that day, but another day they will be. You'll find Terry Place at our Hunting and Fishing Museum in Houghton Lake. He'll answer a lot of your questions, but I doubt if he'll tell you the exact location of his favorite little trout stream. And I'll never tell.
Mary Fuller has sent in a venison fajitas recipe.
Kind of trendy, isn't it?
It is.
Almost
very
yuppie.
Yeah, but it's very, very good. Oh, we're going to have fun with this. We're going to trim off all this fat and fell. Now, this is done at a processor, and you can see why here it would have...
What kind of venison is it? Is that a...
That's supposed to be a steak.
Deer?
Yes.
Okay.
It was labeled venison steak.
I know sometimes you slip in elk and...
No, that was venison. And going to go ahead and just season the pieces with garlic powder rather than salt. And then just put those into the pan. Now, you don't want to cook those thoroughly just until it starts losing its color. But to me, they taste good just like that, coming right out. It's trimmed good and would taste just perfect, just like that.
That's beautiful venison. That's the way it should be trimmed.
Absolutely. I'm going to go ahead and add your taco seasoning right to the same pan. What makes this nice, too, is that everything's done basically in one pan.
Well, and with these packages, holy cow, you can't get any easier than this.
That's right. And then your taco shells, they just hit the pan for just a couple seconds, and then you flip them in.
No oil? Flour?
No oil, that's right.
Tortillas.
Flour tortillas, no oil. And then you can go ahead and make your fajitas any way you want, with lettuce, tomatoes, whatever you think you like.
You know, I have a feeling Garner is going to stack his up so much that he can't hardly talk.
Excuse me just a second. Yeah, this is like no other Mexican food I've ever eaten. I mean, this venison, big hunks of venison, not just burger or whatever included in it. Gosh, this is great.
Really adds something to the recipe, I think, as far as the taco seasoning and everything goes.
But you can still taste the venison taste.
Absolutely.
It isn't disguised like, you know, some recipes.
No.
Hey, anytime you take fresh vegetables and, you know, onions and tomatoes and things like that with some nice sauce, good venison, man, you can't beat it.
I think that's the most pleasing thing about the recipe, that it has that little hint of good venison flavor. But it's a Mexican dish. You can make it as hot as you want. And I like that it isn't burger. You know, I mean, I eat as
Actually,
much.
it's steak.
Yeah, those little chunks of meat. It's probably more Mexican-like.
It's far more like the fajitas you see in the good restaurants and things.
Bob, stop eating for a second.
I know.
I don't expect this to continue.
Mary's Meaty Venison Fajitas. This is a recipe everybody would like, and if you don't have venison, use beef or pork. We have step-by-step instructions in the current issue of the Outdoor Digest magazine. Basically, it's going to get better if the weather is warm. I don't have to tell you to get outdoors. You know it's a great place to be. See you next week. Next week on Michigan Outdoors, along with our fishing forecast for the summer, we're going to have a report on this ban, this talk of the ban on semi-automatic rifles. It really is something that affects sportsmen. An objective report next week.